other works on law, ethnicity and politics, including numerous essays on the Palestinian problem.
A sense of justice, world Jewry, and the one-state solution. In thinking about a sense of giving some due back, justice, and how relating this theme to world Jewry and overcoming Zionism, there is a need to dwell nearer than any programmatic words of what ought to be done. Two states or one state, there are deep forces that may well make sure that neither will happen. The ownership of tribal thinking goes very deep. And I think we should go, at least show the need to go that deep. And I'll try to articulate something that akin to what the French philosopher Jean-François Lyotard called the Jews with a small j, to distinguish it from actual Jews as a phenomenon that belongs to human being and thinking. In the same way, the terrorism is a phenomenon that may be distinguished from actual terrorists. We must not be external and representational of rights and duties in thoughts and action. We must connect to what is, but not the is of unjust acts, but the is, the deepest primordial self-concealing is, the how of the people who perpetrate these acts, who justify, rationalize them as no choice, as we saw in the Lebanon destruction and the Gaza massacre. Only then mirroring and ethical reflection become possible, without mediation, without hiding behind the seemingly most relevant, but nevertheless distanced language of big yeses and big no's, of programs and solutions. Current affairs is not yet the actuality of the actual. To just be an anti-Zionist, however morally irrefutable it is, and however in a sense Zionism causes the injustice in Palestine, it is still not finding a connecting issue to the apartheid being and thinking of the people whose gap draws them into perpetrating and rationalizing these injustices done to the Palestinians in the Jewish name. Indeed, Zionism may just be a symptom and not the cause. The latest unity behind the no choice of the massacre in Gaza can give us a hint of the ways Zionism preserved through the economy of hatred and actually succeed in preserving a certain paradox that it gets and succeed by generating hatred against itself. It is important to connect the Jewish and Zionist questions because pathologies of Zionism, its racist mentality, its righteousness, and something that is not often mentioned, its self-destructiveness and collective suicidal tendency that holds it together, its desire for self-destructiveness, as well as the stake in bestowing protections on the free rein for having the desire for these self-destructiveness, all these pathologies may be in the service of righteousness and aggressive victim apartheid mentality that pertain to Jewish being and thinking. The reactions of Jews to Zionism could not be more varied and seemingly contradictory, sometimes supporting Zionism as Jews, sometimes oppose it as Jews. Very generally, surveying those reactions of those making observations along the way, I would like to suggest that there is a point, and there is a practical one at that, on the way of arriving at a one state in Palestine, when anti-Zionists should talk about the connections between being Jewish and being Zionist. I would like to suggest the possibility that Zionism is a historical manifestation of Jewish being, a negative one, whose foretold failure contributes to the further fortifications of Jewish being and thinking, that assimilating exile of a suppressed trauma of separation that characterizes that thinking. The so-called moderate or left Zionists claim the right of Israel to exist in safe borders. By advancing this claim, they completely ignore the racist premise upon which the state is based. This means that first, they completely ignore, highly marginalize and indefinitely postpone the need to address past expulsions of Palestinians. A state with Jewish majority and character could only be established by the well-planned program of expulsions of 750,000 of indigenous people in Palestine. Second, they also ignore that superior stake in the Israeli state which is assigned to all those who pass the test of Jewishness. This superior stake translates into inbuilt discriminations of non-Jew Arabs in all walks of life, from immigration to resources, viewing them as a demographic threat. Yet nothing prevents these seemingly moderate Zionists from rigorously interpreting on egalitarian principles to other political conflict in the world. Those seemingly moderate Zionists then confine their criticism of the Israeli state to the banner of ending the occupations and the two-state solution, side by side to stating the right of racist Israel to exist in safe borders. Their moral condemnations of the state called for reforming, but never to replace it with a state that would address past injustices and would provide for equality of citizenship for all its citizens. When confronted as to their contradictory position, those so-called lefties, Zionists, some of whom are highly respected humanists, bring up their modern Jewish identification to the fore. This identification, which does not seem to be based on religion, involves conscriptions of ordering memory in the form of collective trauma of anti-Semitism, pressure of assimilations, and of the Jewish Holocaust. They then claim it is in the Jewish interest as people and nations to have a Jewish state. Liberal Zionists then claim that Israel is unique and is a less than ideal solution to a unique predicament. There is indeed no choice. As Joseph Mas'ad aptly puts it, liberal Zionist Jews would claim in effect that Israel has the right to be racist, no choice but to be racist, namely the right to dispossess, to occupy, to discriminate. And this claim is the basis for their otherwise unexplained black spot of murderous righteousness. It is in their Jewish identification, and I would say Jewish identification, and I would say thinking like Jews, that despite being secular, that makes them righteous Zionists. Many liberal Zionists oppose the so-called Jewish fundamentalism, but nevertheless would cling loyally to the horrible actions that are done in the name of the Jewish state, with no wink of the eye. But here is a point. They can argue with an anti-Zionist about Zionism, but that would be manageable for them. But the moment the anti-Zionist would connect Zionism to criticism of Jewish being and thinking, liberal Zionists would vehemently oppose the move, as going one step too far, describing the anti-Zionist as anti-Semitic or self-hating Jew. What causes this pathology of denial that enables so effectively rationalizations of this contradictory position of a Jew that objects connecting anti-Zionism to Jewish question? What is the nature of this the internal fetter in operation here? We have to take their claim that Israel is unique and not relegated to a mere oversight to be overcome. Liberal Zionists are indeed unique. We must not tame them. And the uniqueness and contradictions of their being and thinking should not be tamed into some general humanism, but rather is quite psychotic in nature, is to be mirrored back to them. Can anti-Zionism, as currently configured, do that? I mean, do that, finding a connective tissue to this psychosis, rather than merely pointing something out to them. To criticize Zionism as immoral is as easy as pie, but to find a connective tissue to it is very, very hard. The more they are punished, the stronger the psychosis becomes. Let us look at what is then, rather than the representations of what ought to be. Victim mentality that hides aggression and supremacy, that living force and unity which is nourished by the desire to be hated, stems, before all else, from sublimated hatred of and supremacy towards all others. That hatred of all others is a manifestation of self-hatred, which is itself symptomatic of an unresolved trauma and separations from some basic human ability, some ethical ability of humans to respond, to mirror, to be response-able, to be flicker in the interconnectedness of all living beings. The attributions of self-hatred to anybody who criticizes Zionism, being Jewish, is a good clue to that collective psychosis of self-hatred that they project onto others. The more this psychosis interacts with people, whether violently or ethically, it assimilates them into an economy of victimhood and hatred. And when they do not like that and hate that, all the better, the stronger the Zionists become. The economy of hatred is nothing but a project of deep sense of separation that must never be touched, even if it comes at the price of rationalizing contradictions, and when happens in nationalism context, become mass murder, as I said, with a wink of the eye, like we saw in Gaza. I would like to move from liberal Zionists to Jews against Zionism. Modern lefty Jews against Zionism, unlike the liberal Zionists, seek to first criticize and then neutralize the genuine Jewishness that liberal Zionists identified themselves with, so that they subject liberal Zionism to a general humanist critique, liberal or Marxist, anti-apartheid struggle, like any other anti-apartheid struggle. Why not saying just anti-Zionist? What is it that makes them Jews, apart from the immediate expediency of calling themselves such, so as to overcome any criticism of anti-Semitism by Zionists? Furthermore, what makes their Jewishness such that it would object Zionism? Modern secular Jews against Zionism is the most political correct way of entering the acceptable discourse of anti-Zionism. At the heart of this political correctness is a claim that the acknowledgement of the Jewish experience of persecution and anti-Semitism, including the remembrance of those experiences, must not lead to ethno-nationalism of the Zionist kind. The whole upshot of acknowledging the Jewish predicament while separating it from Zionism is to avoid playing into the hands of the new possible form of anti-Semites who would now resort to objections to the use made of the Holocaust to justify the horrible actions that are now done by the state of Israel in the Jewish name. The whole upshot of Jews against Zionism, secular, modern Jews against Zionism, left Jews, is to say, not in my Jewish name. For Jews against Zionism, Zionism abuse of the Holocaust memory is precisely to forget the general humanist message of the Holocaust. Thus, for Jews against Zionism, political correctness dictates that it is not religious conflict but rather a colonial one, which is rooted by colonial imperialist ideology. The possibility of this abuse by Zionism is a necessary continuation of the very pathology that they want to separate from it. The possibility of this abuse by Zionism is a necessary continuation of the very pathology that they want to separate from it, is ruled out, expelled. To the extent of which Zionism might continue the provocation that characterizes mysterious history of anti-Jewish thinking, however enlightened Jews were involved in their communities, in the diaspora and in exile, a point the Jews against Zionism do not allow to bring to the surface, remain concealed and forgotten. Jews against Zionism separate the Jewish and the Zionist question. It is precisely this obsessive surrender to political correctness, these convictions about exclusions of debating the authentic and faithful Jewish continuum between Zionism of the Holocaust and the Holocaust, which makes both violent manifestations that both paves the way for preserving the Jewish faith, which makes Jews against Zionism so very Jews. It is the denial that there is something so Jewish in that which has provoked the Holocaust, and the dealing with which has been so successfully postponed by the Holocaust. Furthermore, by the exclusion, they allow Zionists to go on unhindered, because Zionism's Jewish core is not allowed to be connected to. What makes so very key in the historicity of survival of the Jewish being and thinking is not confronted. Jews against Zionism become indirect, sophisticated Zionists, despite their good and humane intention. To wit, Zionists in the sense of preventing any possibility of sticking a wedge in the denial, in foreclosing any possibility of genuine mirroring, and by entrenching further the political correctness of separating Jews and Zionists. The Jewish question disappears into a general humanist discourse that is then represented as a moderate as opposed to fundamentalist Jewish thought. The necessity of expelling Jewish fundamentalism, thus opening a possibility of them to be the moderate and become very important in their efforts. Secular moderate Jews against Zionism is, I contend, aids neutralize Jewish pathology insofar as concealing that pathology behind humanist attitude, thus enabling that very Jewish pathology to unfold unhindered in history. The voice of Jews against Zionism and the political correctness of Palestinians that will say we have nothing against the Jews means that Zionism that is based on Judaism is thereby becoming either fundamentalist or, if liberal, based on overcoming misconceptions and misuse by liberal Zionist Jews of Jewish history. Further, the result is that the Jews against Zionism make their identity as Jews as incoherent and diluted. What exactly makes them Jews becomes incorrected, but nothing would prevent them from going and celebrate many feasts of hatred of all others. So, my essential point is that if we look to the left, broad responses, Jewish responses to Zionism, we'll find no help at all. The left has nothing to say in order to find a connective tissue to the Jewish pathology that actually moves Zionism and the deeper historicity that Zionism is just a fleeting phase of. So, not drowning in political correctness of the left, we try, I think, as anti-Zionists, stop taming it into a conflict like apartheid South Africa or like Northern Ireland. No. It is a conflict that participates in a historicity of the Jewish people. And of the Jewish people, it makes it a Jewish-based conflict, Jewish-based denial, which is unique. If we don't do this, we have become complicit with this deeper historicity. And I'll have my last 3 minutes. I'll take 3 minutes just to say, if it is not in the left, or rather seeing that the left is actually participating in a deeper story, we have to look, if we want to reconfigure anti-Zionism, we have to actually look to the right wing of Jewish reactions to Zionism. It's there which we find the clue, at last, to the deeper historicity the Jews are, or that Zionism is a part of, something that the left tries to forget, to conceal. The right-wing Jewish, broadly divided into two camps, I have no time to develop that. One camp is the Haredim, who are object to Zionism out of a doctrine of waiting and passivity, as Professor Ravitsky told us, not trying to force the end. It's not that they like Zionism, they absolutely abhor it and live completely in exile, continuous exile from it, but it is passive waiting, and they just observe the gradual decline of the political modern identity of Judaism. The other camp is the camp of the religious Zionists, is a camp that actually connect to, is more sophisticated in the sense that it tries to connect to the here and now in a dialectical, in a dialectical matter that says, okay, for the time being, we'll use political Zionism, secular Zionism, as a donkey of the Messiah by collaborating with it. And they become more and more Zionists, more and more sanctifying the land, redeeming it. But as the spiritual father of the religious Zionists, the Rebbe Avraham Kook, says, look, Zionism, I'm collaborating with it, when he commented on Herzl and so on. Zionism, I collaborate with it, but it is fleeting. It is a fleeting phenomenon in a big history, in a big redemption. It will go through a destructive phase. It is destructive because it has this internal contradiction that leads it to self-destructiveness. But this self-destructiveness has a positive role in history, a positive role to play in the overcoming and waiting for the redemption. So what I want to say that what we are observing, the self-suicide of Zionism, the generations of hatred against itself, the connections, the concealment of the left to actually nourish that pathology. The idea that this pathology is just temporal and will self-destruct leads us to see that Zionism is in fact, and I'll end with that, Zionism is in fact is a symptom of a coming conflict, recurring conflict, which is not just tameable to a colonial conflict. It is a conflict that characterizes human thought between two ways of looking at the relationship between human beings and the divine. One which is based on separation, chosenness, victimhood, and is not confined only to real Jews, but another one which is relate with Spinoza, with Buddhism, and with Heidegger, who was silent on the issue of the Jews, and relates to, again, the mysterious connectedness to all being. So being just anti-Zionism is not enough. I think we have to look at the deeper picture, because otherwise we may be complicit with a deeper history that only the right wing understands. Thank you very much.
You are watching the Arabic Hours coverage of the conference One State for Palestine, Israel, a country for all its citizens. We'll be back with more after this program ID.
You are watching The Arabic Hour, a program of news, views, culture, cuisine, and the Arab American experience. To view today's program or any of our previous programs, log on to our website at www.arabichour.org.
And now, Professor Mark Ellis on Israel, ethnic particularism, and universalist values. Mark Ellis is University Professor and Director of the Center for Jewish Studies at Baylor University. He is the author and editor of more than 20 books, including Toward a Jewish Theology of Liberation, which